Pakistan. They have mentioned this that if the Indian forces enter their land, they won't think even twice before using their tactical nukes.
They have never resorted to first use, to the point where we actually, in one of these simulated games, captured their nuclear missile base. And you know their response was, we're not going to use it. Indians keep saying they don't believe we have tactical nuclear weapons. When this gets into the Indian hands, it will create deterrence. You can't have nuclear weapons, which will then, during the course of its life, not be used in. But you know, there is a whole school of belief which states that it is the most useless weapon around. And the whole concept of nuclear deterrence is hogwash and it's not real. All the good that comes out of war gets completely negated by nuclear weapons.
Because after you use nuclear weapons, there's nothing to learn because people have been wiped out.
We are fighting with China on this hand and with Pakistan on the other hand. Do you think we are capable enough of doing that?
Everyone who's tried a two-front war, nothing good has ever come.
Japan, wherever it went, it imposed Japanese language and said you will all industrialize. Which is why it is all the cities and areas that were for the longest time under Japanese occupation, that are all first. Look at Shanghai. Why did Manchuria get industrialized? Because of the Japanese. Taiwan, why is it industrial? Because it was under Japanese occupation. Singapore, under Japanese occupation.
According to you, what is that one thing which India gets wrong about Pakistan every time, even with this government?
To ever believe that they're good faith actors or they can ever be trusted.
We have seen two major wars, which was one is Russia-Ukraine, the second was what happened between Israel, Hamas. 59 hotspots right now. What kind of era are we entering into? Is it?
So let me give you a really weird answer.
Namaste Jai Hind, my name is Jayesh Gangan and this is The J Report, a podcast where we talk about everything that is happening in the world. On tonight's podcast, my guest is Mr. Abhijit Iyer-Mitra, who is a defense analyst. And in this podcast, we talk about nuclear weapons and what is going to be the future of India versus Pakistan conflict. Will India and Pakistan ever indulge in a nuclear war? Is that even a possibility? We talk about everything in detail on this podcast. If you are someone who is interested in military conflicts, India versus Pakistan history, then this episode is just for you. So without any further ado, let's start this one in 3, 2, 1. Abhijit, welcome on this podcast.
Thank you for having me.
We recently recorded a Hindi episode and that was on the lines of history. We traced down geopolitics somewhere, but this particular podcast, I genuinely want to focus on what will be the outcome of whatever is happening between India and Pakistan right now. And if anyone has studied India-Pakistan relations, there's this one word which comes out, which is Cold Start Doctrine. What is this exactly, and can we use that to negate this Pakistani threat?
So, you know, to this day, if you ask 5 Army, Air Force, Navy officers what Cold Start was, you'll get 12 different answers.
Okay.
Okay. They also didn't know what Cold Start was. It was a doctrine. I don't know. It was just concocted out of somewhere and nothing ever happened out of it. Okay? Which is why, have you noticed in the last 5-6 years, more, in the last 10 years, nobody has spoken about Cold Start.
Right.
Right. It came, it died, nobody knows what it was. I myself have about 20 different explanations of what it was. It's best to just put it to one side of history.
Yeah. But then a lot of people are talking about a nuclear war right now and how whatever is happening, it can escalate to that thing wherein we might see a nuclear war. What is that threshold?
So Pakistan has 4 thresholds. Well, technically they have 5 because General Khalid Kidwai, he added a 5th later on in an interview, but 4 main things he said. The first was spatial. Spatial is how much of the territory you capture. If they feel it is too much, they'll use nuclear weapons. The second is the military threshold. If you destroy too much of their military, then they will use. Now, remember, the background is we have a no first use policy. But our policy states India will retaliate massively, very important word, India will retaliate massively to any attack on India or Indian forces abroad. Okay, keep this at the back of your mind. The second is military. The third one is economic, that if you cause enough economic damage in any form, sanctions, actual military action against industry or whatever, they will use nukes. The fourth one is political, that if you destabilize them enough, they will use it.
Yeah.
The fifth one was technically water, okay, which is if you stop the waters, they will use it. We're not stopping the water, we're flooding them. So, see, all of them have workarounds. The point was to be so ambiguous that anything India does, India would have to think 100 times before doing it. And they thought it will give them security. Now, the issue is we have systematically breached a lot of these thresholds without them actually doing anything. Right? Is there a danger? Of course there is. I mean, you tell me one war that has ever been fought without risk.
Of course, there's none.
Nothing exists. The problem really comes about on the military threshold, in my opinion, the military spatial threshold, because you can't capture territory without destroying a large part of the military. Kyunki what happens there is, if say tomorrow you have surrounded Lahore or reached the Indus, the local commander is panicking. He knows he doesn't have the forces. He's collapsing very rapidly. And he needs to use a nuclear weapon to stop you. Now, remember, a nuclear weapon isn't just the destruction. It's also the shock of going nuclear and there's many ways of doing this. The first thing you can do is a signaling strike, which is you fire a nuclear weapon somewhere over the Arabian Sea. I'm just using it as this thing to say, okay, enough. Now you have crossed a line. You don't know when we're going to use this. Number one.
So it's a warning shot.
It's a warning shot. The second is, even if you use a low yield device, what's called a tactical weapon, on a military formation, you see a low yield device, say about a few hundred kilotons, even maybe even 2-3 kilotons up to. If you look at the way modern combat happens, it isn't like, hundreds of tanks hubcap to hubcap going together in a single line, right? It's spread out. If you look at videos from Ukraine, they're spread out over 2-3 tanks in about 6-7 kilometers and things like that. So, you're not going to get more than a kilometer and a half. So it's almost like one nuclear weapon per 4-5 tanks. The cost of that, can you imagine? A nuclear weapon just to take out 4-5 tanks. So it's not tactically effective. It is the psychological effect. Now, you don't have to necessarily do that. So next up from a signal strike would be a tactical strike. The next is a counterforce tactical strike, which is your supply depot, which if you hit, will actually stall the entire armored advance. And for that, because it will be a concentration, it will be a juicy target, so to say, they will hit that. Now, the thing is, if your depot is in India, you've crossed a completely different threshold. If the depot is a forward depot in Pakistani territory, it's still, remember the line I used? India will retaliate massively to any strike on India or India's forces abroad. Now the Pakistani commander has to think very clearly. He thinks they are going to retaliate massively. It is not going to be 1 for 1. It's probably going to be 20-30 for 1. He has no incentive then to just use that one nuclear device.
Right.
His incentive becomes, I need to damage them across the board. I need to use all my nukes at one shot to prevent that retaliation from coming. Now, this guy is feeling pressure, but his other guys are not feeling pressure. Okay. Their lines have not collapsed. So what ends up happening is he calls up army headquarters, Asim Munir, and he says, sir, I need nukes. Asim Munir is thinking about his own land, his own wealth, his own whatever. All the other corps commanders are thinking about that. They know what's going to happen to them if he has to protect himself. Do you think he's going to say yes, Asim Munir?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either. Now, there's a risk. He may very well say yes.
Yeah.
He may believe what he said. I think he's a fraud who I don't think any Pakistan army chief actually believes what they say, but let's assume he does. Is that a risk you want to take? Because remember, destroying a city it's more than just say Bombay or Delhi lost. There's a whole ecosystem of creativity, industry, leadership, finance, wealth that exists out there to get wiped. You've lost about 40 to 50 years worth of human investment, your best human investment in one shot. Okay. Is that a risk you want to take? So there are risks, there are opportunities everywhere. The question is, how far do you want to go? How do you want to go about it? Is just taking about, say, a 20-kilometer zone inside Pakistan okay? Is just taking Gilgit-Baltistan okay? Look, Gilgit-Baltistan is a very tough place to take because of the terrain and things, but it really poses no threat to them physically,
As in?
as opposed to, say, surrounding Lahore.
Okay.
Lahore is their biggest city. It's too much of a reputation. Kashmir is also a reputational blow, right? But not necessarily that much. Of course, it's going to be very bloody. It's going to be a very long, bloody campaign. Um, so again, it's how risk averse or risk taking is your leadership.
But specifically talking about Pakistan, now on several occasions they have mentioned this, that if the Indian forces enter their land, they won't think even twice before using their tactical nukes. I think Nasra or something is the name. They won't even think twice before using that they on their own land. What is the risk over here, and what is our capabilities? How do we deal with that? Because
So look, we've got capabilities to deal with everything. I mean, we've got a localized mobile formation anti-missile capability and things like that. Will it work or not? I don't know. Probably it will. But if you intercept it and it explodes in air, the question of responsibility comes about. Does India accept it as a nuclear attack? Or do we say, well, none of us died, so, is it? Will Pakistan accept that shooting down as a nuclear attack on them? Unica missile un pe udaya. I don't know. If it blows up in between, what do you do about it? Okay. These are all unanswered questions. Nobody's gone into this territory. The bigger question out here is, how do you game this? And we've actually, over the last 13 years, we've conducted close to about 20, 30 war games with the Pakistanis exploring this nuclear threshold. Every time, so when Brigadier Gurmeet Kanwal, Rahul Kanwal's dad headed, he was my mentor as well, one of my mentors. He would do cold start. हमेशा cold start कर देते थे. जब एडमिरल साहब होते थे तो वो ही यूज्ड टू डू नेवल ब्लॉकेड इमीडिएटली, ठीक है, व्हिच इज द इकोनॉमिक दिस थिंग. So we've had everything happen. We've also had a certain political leader then go and do full-on BrahMos, saturation BrahMos strikes and things like that. Now, in all these circumstances, it was very, very curious. Pakistanis never used nuclear weapons till we introduced it, or we conventionally hit one of their nuclear bases and there was a sympathetic detonation. Sympathetic detonation kya hota hai? When the naughty boy on Diwali takes a laddi and throws it into your house, it accidentally falls on your stash of firecrackers and all of them start bursting. So if there is an accidental nuclear detonation because of a missile hit, it is only then that they have used their nuclear weapons in these games. And this is a standard lesson we have over the last 20 games, more than 20 plus games. They have never resorted to first use, to the point where we actually, in one of these simulated games, captured their nuclear missile base.
oh, we did that.
And you know what their reaction was? They did not fire. They did not. So there is something called use it or lose it dilemma. This is your crown jewel. If you don't use it now, the enemy is going to capture it and you're going to lose it. And their response was, we're not going to use it. You know why? Their explanation was, the Indians keep saying they don't believe we have tactical nuclear weapons. We don't have the technological ability to miniaturize. When this gets into the Indian hands, it will create deterrence because then they will know we have tactical nuclear weapons.
So you're letting your missile go off.
Now you might think this is really stupid, but have you seen Shahbaz Sharif's statement today?
Yeah.
saying that we didn't shoot down all the drones that came in because it would reveal their location.
Yeah, yeah.
This is similar. It's kind of the nuclear version of this. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So, it's the other risk, of course, is do you actually want to trust war simulations in a real situation?
Hmm.
Because, war simulation, you're never going to be under the panic reaction and pressure of a real war. The contextual change, the situational change completely changes the response as well.
Hmm.
So, like I said, lots of risk, but I mean,
But
it-
what is their reasoning behind this? I mean, there could be 2, 3 scenarios. One is, of course, they are scared to use it. The other one could be that what they are saying might be true, but what is exactly happening over on that side? What is their thinking?
self-preservation. It's self-preservation because they realize what is going to happen when they
Hmm.
use it. Right? Now, you also have to remember that from our side, we have never hesitated to do a massive retaliation.
Hmm.
The moment Pakistan uses it, the moment, the team that runs the simulation is trying to get you to escalate.
Right.
So, they're stirring the pot, so to
Hmm.
say. So we will always, the first thing when a sympathetic detonation happens is to put out a statement saying, well, we have not used nuclear weapons. This is most probably a sympathetic detonation, but we have adhered to India's no first use policy. We have not used any weapons. They, on the other hand, every time they have used it after a sympathetic detonation, they have never done first use, by the way. They've only done sympathetic detonation. What ends up happening is if we always then use like 15, 20 uh, 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 nukes on their cities and things like that, big cities. And the very curious thing out there is at that point of time, because from India, we take both political leaders and
Hmm.
retired military. It is the military saying, sir, mat karo, mat karo, mat karo. And it's the political leader, nahi, ab hoke hi rahega.
Okay.
Normally, it is the political leadership restraining the military saying, bhai, thoda over ho raha hai ye.
Hmm.
No. In this case, without fail, the anger that I've seen, and it isn't anger, by the way, it's very cold calculation that, a line has been crossed. They can't get away with this. You literally, when that nuclear attack happens, you see the role reversal happening between the military and the civil leadership. The least we've ever retaliated when the military actually literally begged and pleaded with the political leader, with the pretend prime minister, was you heard me talking to that person
Yeah.
earlier. Was We did 7.
7.
We blew up 7 of their big cities in response to one attack with a nuclear device on a brigade headquarters.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
7 high yield ones,
Yeah.
100 kiloton yield ones. Lahore, Rawalpindi, Karachi, Islamabad. No, we spared Islamabad that time
Okay.
because we're like, देख इस बार बख्श दिया, अगले बार नहीं बख्शेंगे.
Hmm.
Muzaffarabad, we go nasty.
Hmm. Okay. But now explain to me what happens when this nuclear attack happens. Give me like second by second or minute by minute what is happening if that scenario comes up in, let's say, real world thing.
Look, it's impossible. I mean, there's the model. I can only talk about the modeling. I can't talk about what actually happens in real life because we don't have a historical this thing to go by, right? But what ends up happening usually in the modeling is you don't have the time to detect it because the flight times are so short.
It is that short that we cannot even detect
Yeah,
it.
because see, Pakistan, every time they've used it, they resorted to battlefield nukes on an important military base. And what happens that time is they are usually within about 50, 60, maximum 100 kilometers of the border. where a missile reaction time is nothing. They're traveling at very high speeds, way over supersonic. I mean, if you go for they've never used an IRBM, which would technically be hypersonic, but at such high speeds, you can't, you don't have the time.
Hmm.
It just, the brigade headquarters always goes down without detection, fight, interception. Because remember, with artillery is much slower. You have time. Artillery rockets, you have time. Okay, the counter battery radars and things like that, which are meant to detect this, do detect this, intercept it, etc., etc. Not with ballistic missiles.
What is the global reaction if that happens? If Pakistan uses it first?
Look, what do you think's gonna happen?
Because there's
We're
this.
never. It's an interesting question because we've never gamed the aftermath
Yeah,
of a
exactly.
nuclear strike. But I suspect you'll hear a lot of howling, but very little action.
Okay, because there's this theory that if any country in the world uses nuclear first, there will be repercussions, and probably the whole world will go poof in few seconds.
That simply doesn't. When a nuclear attack happens, in my experience, the rest of the world immediately is like, "Bhai, inko ye, uh, these are patients of some extremely viral disease." COVID के time क्या हुआ था? Everybody, you're required to self isolate, and nobody wants to touch you with a barge pole. They'll put out statements, but like you remember during COVID, everybody wanted to make a video of them making this Dalgona coffee. So they do Dalgona coffee statements. So they're like, "Whoa,
Okay.
there is no action." Never have they imposed sanctions on us. We've got lots of statements, but no sanctions.
But do you think in our lifetimes we'll ever see that?
Look, it's almost inevitable we'll see it. Okay, you can't have nuclear weapons, any type of weapon, which will then, during the course of its life, not be used in war. It will at some point. It was already used in war. I mean, it was used within war within a year of development. Two of them,
But never after that, right?
but never after that. But it will be used at some point. But there is a whole school of belief which states that it is the most useless weapon around. And the whole concept of nuclear deterrence is hogwash that's been created by academics and politicians. And it's not real.
As in?
Let me give you an example. So, uh, if nuclear weapons deterred you, why did Argentina take the Falklands? Why did North Korea start the Korean War? Why did North Vietnam start the Vietnam War? Why did so many countries support the uh, uh, insurgency in Afghanistan against the USSR? They were all nuclear powers, right? Nothing happened, right? So there is and in the case of the Falklands, it is a direct attack on British territory, which kuch nahi hua. So one is this, that the precedent exists where you can actually, that nuclear weapons don't deter.
Hmm.
The answer to that is nuclear weapons deter nuclear, they don't deter conventional.
That is true. Yeah.
Okay. Not necessarily in some cases. So, for example, between the USA and USSR, it also created conventional deterrence.
Okay.
So, which is why they fought proxy wars. Okay. The second is actually the much more dangerous points. The fire bombings of Tokyo in the Second World War caused a lot more death and destruction than the nuclear bombs. The nuclear bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki killed what, 50, 75,000 people, depending on Hiroshima or Nagasaki, where every firebombing of Tokyo killed about 100, 120, 150,000 people. Every city was firebombed, Kyoto, Tokyo, all of them, Osaka, killed magnitudes more than the nuclear bomb. So if you were Emperor Hirohito or General Tojo sitting in Tokyo, this wasn't such a big, you had seen bigger strikes. So what actually got you scared? Had the first one on Hiroshima got you scared, why didn't you surrender immediately? Why did you wait 2 days later for Nagasaki to happen? Third, fourth really, Japan had its own nuclear program. It knew exactly what a nuclear bomb was. It wasn't that they were shit scared. Everybody quotes Truman's speech, which
Hmm.
says, it makes the sun glow
Yeah.
100 times brighter or whatever nonsense. They knew exactly, they knew what the hell it was. Okay. So it wasn't even this thing, like the white man goes into deep dark Africa and he uh, switches on a torch and everybody thinks they're God. No, that's not it. The next thing was the fact that the USSR had declared war just 5 days before. Now, there is
Hmm.
also the theory that America wanted Japan's surrender to America and not to the USSR. And to facilitate that, they used nuclear weapons,
Okay.
which may be true
Hmm.
because the USSR had just declared throughout the World War, Japan did not declare war on, though when Japan attacked America, Hitler declared war a few days later on America. He expected Japan to declare war on the USSR. Japan did not. But 6 months, I mean, Japan surrendered 6 months after
Hmm.
Germany. It's maybe more. What happened with the USSR was 5 days before Hiroshima, they declared war on Japan. And Japanese forces in Manchuria just collapsed.
Okay.
But again, the issue then becomes that you still have the huge ocean between you.
Hmm.
Right now, Taiwan is finding it, China is finding it difficult to attack Taiwan, which is just 100 kilometers away.
Hmm.
Hitler couldn't attack he couldn't conquer Britain, which was just 40 or less kilometers away on the English Channel. The Japan Sea is huge in between. It's like 500 kilometers of this thing. How are you going to do it? But they got spooked because of the speed of the collapse
Hmm.
in this thing. They had also seen what happened to the Nazi leaders, how the Soviets treated Nazi leaders. So they themselves might have been more inclined to surrender to the Americans instead of this thing. When you add all of this, it's actually a absolutely sound academic, tactical, real life case that maybe deterrence is fiction. And we're so used to it, we don't see that it actually doesn't work and nuclear weapons don't work. And the last person to make this point is Yuval Harari. He says it's such a useless weapon that war is good for you generally. And the person to read on this is Ian Morris. War, what is it good for? Uh, all the good that comes out of war gets completely negated by nuclear weapons.
Hmm.
Because after you use nuclear weapons, there's nothing to learn because people have been wiped out. There's nothing to rebuild. So it's a whole set of things which believes that they are useless. There is no such thing as nuclear deterrence. So, for example, when I say Jayesh, I think of you as Jayesh. I don't think of you as victory god.
Hmm.
Your name means victory god. Jay Ishwar, victory god, ठीक है, or victorious god. Abhijit means always victorious.
Hmm.
ठीक है? You all think of me as always victorious. I can't even
Sometimes.
conquer my own weight. How am I going to conquer anything else? Okay.
You definitely have conquered poetry world.
Yeah, my poetry is like next level, bro. Like I've got news that have been awarded, been nominated, shortlisted for the Sahitya Kala Academy Award, as under the pen name Galidas, younger brother of Kalidas. But anyway, so it completely destroys any case that you have for the use of weapons. Now, like I said, Jayesh, I don't think of you as victory god. You don't think of me as always victorious, even though that's what our names mean. When I give you money, a 500 rupee note, you believe it has value. Your brain is conditioned into thinking it has value. Had I gone to ancient Rome and given 500 rupees, he'd be like, what the hell is this? And burnt it because he doesn't know the value. Right? And that 500 rupee note is actually worth about 20 paisa, the actual value of it. So, it's this, you've trained yourself to believe there is something called nuclear, which is horrible. There is something called deterrence, which exists. In reality, it might not. It might just be a notional concept.
Right. But when we are dealing with Pakistan, we have no first use policy. Do you think we should get rid of that, at least with Pakistan, when it comes to
No, I
Pakistan?
don't think so. And I'll tell you why. The thing about a no first use policy is it gives you a huge amount of flexibility in the options you get to use.
What are these
So, for
options?
example, you can do a lot of things saying, well, we're not the ones using nuclear weapons.
Hmm.
So, if anything happens, bro, it's up to you.
Okay, so we can escalate then.
You can escalate a lot.
Hmm.
You can escalate a heck of a lot. Uh, Risks. There's all
Yeah,
look. There's no such thing as a war without risks. Okay, let's
of
be clear
course.
about this. And when the other country has nuclear weapons, that is also a risk.
Hmm.
So you can escalate a lot. It gives you a lot of options. I don't. And the most important thing is it shows how confident you are because you only have a first use doctrine when you believe that you are extremely vulnerable and you may collapse.
Hmm.
Right? We don't have that.
Okay.
We have a great deal of confidence in our armed forces.
Hmm. But getting rid of no first use policy, at least that is a threat for Pakistan, or is it not?
Not really. Not really. Because, see, the threat from India has never been nuclear. The threat from India has been conventional. It's been water. It's been economic. Um, had you asked me the same question 30, 40 years back, remember 30, 40 years back, India was called the failed state. Pakistan was the rich, prosperous one. And there used to be articles coming out every year or so. Will India disintegrate this year? Is India finished? There's a fellow called Sir John Hackett who led, was it Operation? I forget which, The Bridge Too Far. Have you seen the movie The Bridge Too Far? It was that operation. Market Garden. Operation Market Garden, which was the landing in Nazi Holland to take it over and liberate it and things, or Belgium, I forget. He wrote the Third World War, where he had already disintegrated India, where India had become a confederacy of, to quote him, a confederacy of little Hong Kongs, of thousands of little Hong Kongs.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. People don't remember all of this. I remember a time in India where hunger was a real issue. People would die of hunger. We used to live boat to mouth. So, had you asked me this question 30, 40 years back, I would have said we should be the ones with the first use policy. Now, no.
Hmm. Okay. Coming to the other part of this whole scenario, we have two fronts. It's 2.5, whatever you want to call it, but let's talk about the real world scenario wherein two fronts, we are fighting with China on this hand and with Pakistan on the other hand. Do you think we are capable enough of doing that? Because I was reading this data wherein we have 30 active fighter jet squadrons versus we need 42. So are we capable enough to do that?
It's not a mistake I want. Everyone who's tried a two-front war, nothing good has ever come. If you want to take the risk, congratulations to you. It's not a war I think we can win.
Let's talk about the other side of this. Let's flip this. We are fighting a war with Pakistan. China opens the front. We are not the one who is asking for that. But that is a very real thing that can happen. How do we deal with that then? Because we technically don't have enough friends who would come in.
So this again, everything is risk. So remember, you're doing a risk calculation. Let me tell you, when I say something emphatically, I'm putting a risk calculation of only about 70-75%. There's still a 25% chance that the opposite might be true. Go to the Korean War and see when China entered the Korean War. It's after General MacArthur had pushed the North Koreans all the way back up to the Chinese border, the Yalu River. And it was only when the Americans threatened to push them over the Yalu that the Chinese invaded. Okay. See, the Chinese don't believe in allies, they believe in free radicals. And they'll give you a lot to become a free radical. Their thing is, please don't come back to us. So they gave North Korea nuclear weapons, which is, North Korea itself had very advanced. I think we don't realize how advanced North Korea used to be at one point of time. And this nuclear weapons are 1940s technology you're talking about. अगर 2025 में आपको 1940s टेक्नोलॉजी बनाना नहीं आता है, लानत आप पे. But guided them in the making of precise nuclear weapons, missiles and things like that. What do they expect from North Korea? They expect North Korea to completely destabilize South Korea and Japan,
Mm.
that they will never become a threat to Beijing. They expect Pakistan, which got lots of nuclear designs, pre-tested designs, uh, uh, heavily discounted weapons and things like that, to keep India off balance.
Yeah.
They use Laos in a very different way to destabilize ASEAN in negotiations, not militarily or terrorism or anything. It's a different tactic, but they use that. Okay. Now, the issue in all of this is Pakistan got all this stuff on several promises. The alliance was built when Pakistan was the rich one, India was the poor one. So they looked economically stable at that time. We looked economically disastrous at that time. Everything that you say about Pakistan today was applicable to us at that time. Second, they were running very shortly after that the Punjab insurgency, which was extremely violent,
Mm.
from their point of view, extremely successful. And simultaneously, they were running the Kashmir insurgency, okay, which was insane. Now, Pakistan delivered on its promises. It was economically strong. It kept a quarter of the Indian army bogged down in Punjab, another quarter of the Indian army bogged down in Kashmir, which means half the Indian army out of commission. If they put their army on the field, then it would mean the whole Indian army would be occupied here, and China had absolutely no threat.
Mm.
What has happened since then? The Kashmir insurgency is effectively over. Just to restate what we discussed last year, terror is not insurgency.
Yeah.
Terror attacks can happen in the absence of an insurgency. The Punjab insurgency is long since over. So your two greatest bargaining chips are over. तुम्हारी economic हालत क्या है? Even then, China wanted to fix their economic situation and started the China-Pakistan economic corridor. Pakistan sabotaged that. Pakistan deliberately sabotaged that. And the Chinese are now pissed off.
Mm.
We tried to prop up your economy. You said no. We gave you lots of discounted weapons. You haven't used them. You've lost the Punjab insurgency. Fine. You had the Kashmir insurgency. You've lost that also. I'm willing to tolerate all this nonsense, including Pakistan training Uyghur terrorists who would blow up things in China proper. Pakistan failed. So China is now looking at Pakistan going, well, what's the point? You're worth nothing to us. You're worthless.
But they have their investments over there, right? The CPEC.
See, they've got CPEC investments, but India's made a statement we won't be touching Chinese investment. And they themselves, and they've actually remarkable statement which nobody wants to quote. They said if there's a war and, because it runs through disputed territory in Kashmir, the road.
They've mentioned disputed territory.
And I forget the exact language, but they said if the territorial reality were to change, we would, of course, negotiate with whoever is in charge.
Seriously?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so they have completely changed their stance over the years now.
No. It's actually been a
was-
very consistent stance, yeah. Kashmir is disputed. And you know why they can't change their stance on Kashmir? Think.
Hmm.
Because in 1947-48, what was a bilateral dispute between India and Pakistan has since 1962 become a trilateral dispute.
Correct.
Because the whole of Aksai Chin is with
Hmm.
them. Now, if you read the resolution, the relevant resolution, what does it say? It says, first, the aggressor will withdraw. It doesn't say aggressor, but whatever. Pakistani troops have to withdraw. The whole of Kashmir, then India has to send in a peacekeeping force. India then has to conduct a referendum out there for the
Right.
whole of Kashmir. Now, there is no way they can win a referendum just to keep Aksai Chin. There is no way this part can have an election without this part.
Hmm.
Okay. They don't want to go there. So they've always maintained its disputed territory. Right. So it's actually very curious. Now, will China get involved in this? In the initial stages, maybe sympathetically, they'll do a few Galwans here and there,
Hmm.
fly a few planes around, do some troop concentrations, full military action. No. Ye dhakka mukki, maybe even minor skirmishes in which 10, 12 people die, sure. Anything beyond that? No. More importantly, at what point do I think they'll come in? Maybe if we surround Islamabad. like Hitler in his den when the Soviets had surrounded it, or when we reach the Sindhu,
Hmm.
reach the Indus and are ready to cross the Indus, or maybe when the whole country falls, who knows?
But I'm sure they'll be tempted when we are fighting over here with Pakistan.
Curiously, the modeling suggests otherwise. Every time China's been involved, oh, uh, always all 20 plus times they've been involved, but in at least seven of these, about seven, yeah, China has been the main protagonist. And there's a very standard pattern when China attacks, or rather, when it goes to war, when we and the Chinese go to war, Pakistan always attacks India.
Yeah.
But when India and Pakistan go to war, the Chinese have never attacked. Never, ever. And we get hawks, we get absolute hawks from the Chinese side. And the standard thing to the Pakistanis literally crib. In the post thing debrief, they're like, you are our allies, you should have come. They're like, did we lead you to believe that? Was our message not clear? We told you you are on your own. Please think this through carefully. Why did you escalate it to this point where you wanted us to come in? We are not coming in. Without exception, Jayesh, without exception, they talk down to the Pakistanis. They're like, we're not getting involved in your shit. Why did we give you nuclear weapons? Why did we give you everything? Listen, your security is your goddamn responsibility, not ours. This is why I told you, China, very important, China does not do allies. Even Korea was on the orders of Stalin, he ordered China to go in there. Yes, Stalin played a lot of crap with Korea because he was testing America out there. When the Korean War started, he could have vetoed. It was a UN. It wasn't technically an American intervention in Korea. It was a UN intervention. It was a UN force in Korea, which is why India was also part of it. Stalin could have vetoed it at the Security Council. He refused to veto it. He wanted the war to happen because he thought the Americans will come in, lots of them will die, they will weaken and things like that. When they reached the Yalu, he was like, "Arey, ye to khatam ho jayega." And they reached the Yalu very quickly. MacArthur was quite brilliant in that sense. He turned the tides very rapidly. I mean, it was so bad, the North Koreans had almost pushed the South Koreans to the peninsula.
Okay.
And from the tip of the peninsula, MacArthur went around, hit behind their lines, and turned the entire field around. It was genius. Till the Chinese got in. And Stalin is the one who ordered Mao to go in. Maybe had Stalin not been senior leader at that time, see, Mao held his successor Khrushchev in great contempt. Because he's like, bhai, I was deputy to Stalin. Now you might be much richer. So today, China is way ahead of Russia, right? But in those days, it was Russia that was number one, China that was number two. So Khrushchev was like, who the bloody hell are you to assume leadership? But Mao was like, listen, after him, I was number two. I have to be the head of the communist world, not you. Mao is shit scared of Stalin. Yes, Stalin very frequently used to take Chinese leaders, lock them up, and not return them.
Seriously?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
This has actually happened.
Of course, it happened to the head of Taiwan, Chiang Kai-shek's own son, Chiang Ching-kuo. Chiang Ching-kuo went when Chiang Kai-shek, who was the president of China, was president of China.
Yeah.
He sent his son to the USSR to study engineering somewhere in across the Urals. Stalin didn't let him go home. He married a Belarusian lady out there.
Okay.
Thankfully, it was true love. So
Yeah.
good for him. He found love. He never divorced her. Even he kept him there for years on end. The Soviet ambassador communicated to Chiang Kai-shek that your son really doesn't want to talk to you. And Chiang Ching-kuo was only released when the Chinese Civil War ended and Chiang Kai-shek had decisively lost.
Okay.
And do you know why? Because there is the belief. Now, Chiang Kai-shek was the one, the Kuomintang, which is Chiang Kai-shek's party, which now I think, well, it's gone more on and off in power because Taiwan's a democracy in Taiwan. was the one that did all the fighting against the Japanese. The communists had run away and hidden.
Yeah.
They were waiting for the nationalists to lose the war or get extremely weakened, and then they would attack the nationalists, which is what they did. And the nationalists were still strong enough after doing the 99% of the fighting against the Japanese was done by the Kuomintang and the nationalists, not the communists, even though the communists claimed victory. Even then, they put up a magnificent fight. And Stalin used the son as blackmail. So imagine Chiang Kai-shek, who kehte hain na putra moh, he was so attached to his son, he gave up China for his son.
Damn.
And Chiang Ching-kuo realized what had happened. And he was always the reverence he had for his father. He considered his father God, that this man gave up one of the greatest empires on earth. Probably the only Asian country other than Japan that wasn't colonized. He gave it up for me. He was so reverent towards his father. That's what happened. Right. So understand, this is the kind of man Stalin was. He had no scruples at all. He had foreign leaders killed. And not even, deniability ki I go there and have you killed. Come here, you are sick, you are executed. He had the Mongolian leader executed. Had the president of Mongolia killed. Oh yeah.
And this was happening openly.
Yeah. No Geneva Convention, no Vienna Convention, no nothing.
But what was world's reaction to that?
Kuch nahi. Kuch nahi.
Damn.
So, if you were Mao Zedong, how would you feel about Stalin being your boss?
Mm.
And this is what people don't realize. Till 1959 or 60, the whole of Manchuria was under Soviet occupation. Do you know that?
Under Soviets?
Oh, yes. The last Soviet troops withdrew from China only about 12, 13 years after the war.
12, 13 years after the war.
And what had happened was Japan had industrialized Manchuria like nobody's business.
Hmm.
See, Japan was a very unusual colonial power. They were very brutal. Unlike the British, who were probably the softest of the colonial powers. I mean, look,
Yeah.
colonialism is not good, but let's
Yeah,
say they were the least worst of the colonialists. They never industrialized their colonies.
Hmm.
Japan, wherever it went, it imposed Japanese language and said, you will all industrialize. You will work in factories. You will become modern. That is when you will learn this is the gift of Japanese civilization, which is why it is all the cities and areas that were for the longest time under Japanese occupation that are all first world.
Hmm.
Look at Shanghai. Why is Shanghai this thing? Because it was under Japanese
Right.
occupation. Why did Manchuria get industrialized? Because of the Japanese. Taiwan, why is it industrial? Because it was under Japanese occupation.
Hmm.
Singapore, under Japanese occupation. Right. The Japanese, I remember my mom's driver, Shiva. His father fought for the Japanese. He served as a non-commissioned officer in the Japanese army. When the Japanese took Singapore, the British were like, dude, who are you, dirty black fellow, get lost, whatever. The Japanese dragged him out to school. They said, you're going to go to school. You're going to learn
Okay.
Japanese. They treated him like a Japanese kid.
Forcefully.
Inferior, but Japanese kid.
But forcefully.
But you'll get the exact same education that our general's son gets.
This is
He could
interesting.
speak fluent Japanese. I mean, imagine dark, diminutive, very sweet Telugu gentleman who speaks fluent Japanese, knows his hiragana, katakana, kanji, everything, writes fluent Japanese, has good, solid technical knowledge. They lost everything and they couldn't rebuild it. That's a different matter. And till his last days, he used to call up his friends in Japan that he knew from the army days and talk to them. All in Japanese. All in Japanese. So, very different thing. So, now imagine your Mao Zedong. Would you be scared of Stalin? Would you not?
Of course. Yes.
So there is even the argument that Korea was also done at the behest of somebody else and not China itself.
Okay.
China intervenes for itself. China does not intervene for anybody else. Remember, even when America had severely bombed North Vietnam and things like that, they never interfered. It was well after the American withdrawal that they themselves invaded Vietnam.
Yeah. So you can be.
Now, look, I might be 100% wrong, but based on the models we've played, I rate my theory at about 70% probability.
But these theories, they are based upon what has happened in the past. Looking at the current scenarios.
Both past as well as modeling of current scenarios as best as you can with Chinese leadership and Chinese military, ex leadership, ex military.
Okay. So the threat is lower on that side.
If Pakistan attacks, yes, not
Hmm.
not
Yeah,
okay.
not the
So
other way around.
yeah,
Yeah.
direct war, different matter. Yeah.
Hmm. Okay. And what about America? Let's say there's a full scale war between India and Pakistan. With the current government over there, do you think there will be some kind of meddling between this? Because there have been statements wherein they have said that we have nothing to do over here. We can just talk.
Yeah, which is the best thing to do. Because see, when you take praise from someone, when they turn on you and demand you de-escalate, look what Israel countered on American support. Then Biden decided it wasn't good for his election, and then they had to give in to a ceasefire,
Hmm.
right? So, and look what happened in the ceasefire also. So, be very careful what you wish for. I personally am of the school that we don't need American praise, we don't need American condemnation. If you don't ask for praise, you won't get the condemnation.
Hmm.
So let's keep America's making the absolute right things. It's like, whoa, keep us away. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah. And what about Russia?
Russia is giving us a taste of our own medicine. जाके बोले थे ना आप, now is not the time for war.
Yeah.
So they've come and almost quoted you back to you and said, well, you're asking for de-escalation. But also understand our position. I'm not too harsh about that. That statement needed to be made. किस मुंह से could we accept Russia doing to Ukraine exactly what Pakistan did to us in 1947? Which is what? You cite a religious or ethnic reason to breach a recognized international border and seize and annex land. See, if it supported Russia on that, we had essentially given Pakistan, we were admitting that Pakistan was right to do what it did in Kashmir.
Now, when shit hits the fan, do you think Russia will be there? Because 71,
They will supply us with what we need, more or less.
but they can supply with weapons to Pakistan as well, right? They have tried to woo Pakistan.
The India lobby in Moscow is very strong, which is why we buy a lot more weapons than Pakistan can afford. So the balance is heavily tilted in our favor in Moscow. The problem right now is, do they even have the industrial capacity to produce anything?
Okay. And do you think the China factor plays in between India and Russia now? Because Russia clearly has gone in Chinese lab, according to some theories at least.
Okay, let me nuance this out. Russia, what are Russia's options right now? It's because of international
Of course, there
isolation.
are. Yeah.
You break that isolation, Russia comes out of the Chinese lap.
So it is
And
only
see,
the
thing
isolation that is making them.
The West was paying 3 times the amount per cubic foot of gas that China is.
Hmm.
So it's not a very beneficial Russia relationship for Russia as well, because they're forced to sell to China at rock bottom prices.
Correct. So it is just the situational thing. Okay. Tell me about the other thing which we also talked about on the Hindi podcast, but I think we should get back to that very thing, the disintegration of Pakistan. Um, you can block Indus over here, or you can give them flash floods. You can do a naval blockade from one side. You can destabilize Pakistan via BLA or TTP. If we do all of these things correctly, or at least one of those things correctly, the dominoes start falling. Is that what's going to happen now?
We don't know if the dominoes fall. Sometimes the dominoes don't fall.
But wouldn't BLA or TTP take advantage of that? if we do anything from our end.
They may not. Tell me what more dominoes are left to fall in North Korea's case. Has it disintegrated? Nobody thought the USSR would disintegrate, but it disintegrated. No? Pakistan may or may not disintegrate. The point is to keep trying. Disintegration is never you do one thing and it falls. There's always the straw that broke the camel's back, but uske liye you have to put several boras of straw on the camel's back till it is so overloaded that that one straw finally breaks the back.
And it takes time.
It takes time, it takes effort, it takes patience. You can't do what you did with the BLA. You Chidambaram started supporting the BLA, Doval withdraw support to the BLA. Now you've decided to start supporting them again, allegedly. I don't know if we are. I mean, I don't know.
Pakistan claims that.
I don't think they are. I mean, I think their arms are coming. Allah is materializing their arms in the stratosphere and putting it down. Yeah.
What is, according to you, what is that one thing which India gets wrong about Pakistan every time, even with this government?
To ever believe that they're good faith actors or they can ever be trusted.
Even this government makes that.
It did. Once it didn't make that mistake again. Remember, Modi tried very hard. He invited Nawaz Sharif for his first swearing in 2014. He went to Nawaz Sharif's Khandani wedding, and they tried a lot of the Vajpayee style Jhapiya Papiya thing, because the belief then was that Nawaz Sharif had been backstabbed by Musharraf, which was true. And Modi just decided, look, bro, you sort your own house out. I'm talking to you. Now, you sort your own house out, your problems with your army chief. Don't put it on me. I'm not talking to you anymore. And so for the last, 7, 8 years, they've refused to talk to them. This government also made the mistake. It made it once and it never made the mistake again. And I think that's been the best policy ever.
So do you think we can take back PoJK?
It depends how many planes, tanks, humans are you willing to lose?
So explain this to me. If you want to annex a land, how do you do that? What is the cost of that?
It's impossible. I mean, it depends so much on terrain. And Pakistan-occupied Jammu and Kashmir is different kinds of terrain, which is extremely difficult. See, capturing flat land in Punjab is easy. Capturing desert land in Rajasthan is slightly tougher because the sand destroys tanks and things like that very quickly. Mountains, bro, you can't take tanks. It's all by foot and things like that. It's actual physical presence. You can't use armored vehicles. People have to get out. Helicopters will be shot down transporting commandos. Your soldiers will be shot on every single mountain and thing. On the Pakistan-occupied Kashmir side, thick, dense forest. So it's like Vietnam being fought at altitude. On the Gilgit-Baltistan Ladakh side, it is lunar landscape. You're fighting 1,000 Siachens all at once. कैसे करोगे? कारगिल में हमारे कितने लोग मरे थे? ठीक है, more of their people died. Are you willing to fight 1,000 Kargils?
Of course not.
Do you think you have the stomach to fight 1,000 Kargils? I think sometimes, we tend to underestimate our enemies a bit too much. And it's always something that's made me very, very uncomfortable. Maybe lessons even here, given what happened on the first day. I'm not going to elaborate on that. Please don't ask me to. Never assume your enemy is stupid. Never assume they're unprepared. Never assume they are weak. Like they say, you prepare for the worst, but hope for the best. The problem with us overwhelmingly is that we tend to prepare for the best and
hope for the worst.
If we don't hope for the worst,
Yeah, of course.
But
the worst happens.
We end up facing the worst.
Yeah. Interestingly, there was this one theory which was floated around, and we did talk about how China can use Pakistan if we are fighting a war with China. The trade tariff war that was going on between America and China. It was almost as if the manufacturing of the world could come to India. Of course, Trump wants that to go back to America.
Yeah.
But there were chances that China se wo aa jayega yahan pe. At that exact very point, this thing happens, wherein Pahalgam, the attack happens, and we retaliate, and this could escalate to anywhere now. Do you think China has some role to play in this?
No. I'll tell you why. War risk doesn't disrupt, unless it's a severe catastrophic war risk, it doesn't disrupt investment. You look how well Israel has done in the last 2 years since the October 2023 terror attack. Uh, the Israeli economy has been booming.
Hmm.
So where's this? When COVID happened and so much investment went out of China, 99% of it, 90% of it went to Vietnam. It didn't come to India. Why? Because Vietnam, we don't invest in people. Vietnam invested in people. They did train the trainer programs, and the trainer programs, we paid a lot of money to then train more trainers. They essentially bred teachers like rabbits breed, good teachers. And they're well on their path to industrialization. Even though they started well after us, they're way ahead of us. Right, in certain aspects, of course. I mean, not a broad brush. But with China, no matter how much investment they lose, there's a limit to how much can come in India because our systems are so pathetic. Our regulation is horrible. Our taxes are horrible. Retrospective taxes every now and then, unaccountable babus.
I am a Marwadi, so I have a family business which is manufacturing unit. I know the major fuck ups that government has done over there.
Yeah, there you go. And see, the issue is you can prove somebody got it wrong. Tum wrong karo to jail. Wo wrong karo to seniority based promotion. So I don't know if people, IAS candidates are watching, it might be the most attractive job for you. You can keep screwing up. If you're a pathological screw up at home, if your mother thinks you're a loser or a failure, IAS is the best option for you because no matter how much you fuck up, you can never lose your promotion.
That is true. Yeah. But how does the economy of a country which is at war gets affected?
It depends on the nature of the economy.
As in?
So, for example, if you're industrial and you get bombed heavily, like Germany did, it's finished. Okay. If you're like North Korea, which was the second richest country in Asia after Japan till 1979, they prospered immensely after this Korean War. South Korea did not prosper. They only started prospering in the 1970s after Chun Doo-kwan. I think, was it? No. I forget who the president was. But anyway, Japan, as long as you invest in human beings, see, buildings are rebuildable. Human capacity is not rebuildable. Human capacity will take you decades to rebuild. Broken buildings,
But for India, we are largely an agrarian economy, if I'm not mistaken.
we're a subliterate third world mix of low quality services and agriculture and third rate agriculture.
That's the biggest black pill that you have given me today.
Well, it is. Tell me one great contribution of India to agriculture in the last 50, 70 years. Zero. All of it has come from Thailand, Japan, mostly Israel, and the Netherlands.
So, what happens to our economy in a war with Pakistan?
In a war with Pakistan, well, you'll be the same at the end that you were before. तुम्हारे लोग वही गवार रहेंगे, वही सर्विसेज करते रहेंगे. Hello, sir, I am Watson calling. How I may help you, bank? Hello, madam. And your Punjabi farmer will be doing his normal useless farming, unproductive, leaching MSP. Nothing will change. War can act as a simulator. War can act as a destroyer. In India's case, war will do nothing.
And for Pakistan?
What is Pakistan? भाई तुम्हारा क्या इंडस्ट्री है हमको तबाह करने के लिए?
There's nothing.
There's nothing.
But even they are agrarian economy.
They are an agrarian economy. So what are you going to do? You're going to burn their crops.
We can, but I don't think so.
You're not allowed to, as per the rules of war.
Yeah.
So what are you going to do? Are you going to annex them? In which case you're adding 200 million plus 240 million deranged, psychotic, identity issue challenged lunatics to your population. Do you want that?
But that is the case with PoJK as well, right? If we annex PoJK,
Well,
that is the same
PoJK is
problem.
sparser. It's sparsely populated. Well, Gilgit Northern, what they don't consider that Kashmir. So I have to say this: Gilgit Baltistan, Muzaffarabad area, as in that part, the southern part with the strip, heavily populated.
Hmm.
So yeah, you'll have to deal with it. But the point is, it's easier to absorb that. It is less of a percentage change to your population than the whole of Pakistan,
Hmm.
or even this side of the Indus is.
Okay.
I won't wish Pakistan on anyone, but you can't take a land without the people in there.
That is true.
Yeah.
And what do you do with those people when you have taken the land?
Imagine uh, Azad Kashmir, so called, has what, 15, 20 million people? Easy. You're adding 15, 20 million highly radicalized terror pool to your population.
And we cannot even do something with China does in Xinjiang.
Can't. You shouldn't, but
Yeah, of
anyway.
course, we should.
What did they achieve? But yeah.
A global perspective, we have seen three major, not three, two major wars, which was one is Russia, Ukraine. The second was what happened between Israel, Hamas, Gaza, whatever, Palestine. Third could be India and Pakistan. And there are 59 hotspots right now, if I'm
Yeah,
not
yeah,
mistaken.
something like that.
After all of this, what kind of era are we entering into? Is it,
So let me give you a really weird answer.
yeah,
All astrologers are saying 2026 is, bro, like I'm an atheist and I'm still,
bro, we have come from geopolitics to astrology.
trust me, I don't believe in God, but I believe in astrology. If you've got
Are
a
you
good
are you
astrologer,
serious?
I'm dead serious.
Okay.
They're scary accurate. It's not like, Jayesh, you might get a big break in 2024. No, there've been astrologers who've told me very specific things. You're going to have an accident. You're going to go to jail, which have actually on this date and exact come true within a week.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. You're going to get sick. You're going to get, how does somebody predict you're going to get diabetic? How would they know? And you will detect it on this date. So I believe in astrology, but even independent of that, the way, nothing has been a bigger danger to industrialization than finance. It both enabled industrialization, but the over financification of an economy is so dangerous. There is no greater threat today to of a system of systems collapse than international finance. This huge amount of non-existent wealth floating around is going to come crashing down. And I suspect we're heading towards that. You can't be sure, but my belief is just invest in gold and silver.
Which is why I think India has brought crazy amount of gold.
No, we haven't bought. We've got the 10th biggest official gold supply, national gold supply, 800 tons or something like that. I think America is the biggest with 8,000 tons. But India has more, the Indian housewife, if you collect that as a unit, has more gold than the top 10 gold owning nations put together, including America. We own, how much? 21,000 tons of gold are with the Indian housewife.
21,000 tons.
National Reserve, 800 tons. Indian housewife, 21,000 tons. America, 8,000 tons. The Indian housewife owns 3 times the amount of gold that America owns.
I hope so that comes handy when the time comes.
मैं अभी बोल रहा हूँ गोल्ड खरीद के रख ले. For every 5 that you invest in gold, invest 1 in silver and keep it. Because gold is not easily barterable when the world comes to an end. Silver is easier barterable. And keep some good cutters, so when the world ends, you can cut a little piece of silver, measure it, and give it.
Yeah, handy tips.
I'm not very optimistic about 2026, bro. I'll tell you that honestly.
Is this geopolitical answer or an astrological answer?
No. Given my general pessimism, I came to this I came to a general conclusion that we're heading for a systems reset. Okay, things can't continue the way they are. It's going to be some kind of a system of systems collapse. The fact that the astrologer is saying something like this is happening in 2026 has now got me panicking.
Okay.
देखते हैं क्या होता है.
Yeah. Yeah. Coming back to Pakistan.
But remember, when I say something is going to happen, it's still a 60-70% probability. In this
Yeah,
case,
yeah.
because of my astrological fear, maybe I've elevated it to 80%. But look, the situation in finance is just unsustainable.
Hmm.
Had the nature of industry, or at least manufacturing, been modern manufacturing, but with the nature of finance as it was in the 60s, 70s, I would have been
Yeah.
much more confident. But the way finance has gone berserk with its ability to completely skew an economy. And the classic example of this is Great Britain. You know, Margaret Thatcher, because all her predecessors had deindustrialized Britain, she decided to go finance. It
Hmm.
lasted, the bubble lasted. I mean, she prevented the collapse of Britain, or the complete decline of Britain, not the collapse of Britain, for about 15, 20, 30 years. But it was inevitable. Britain today is poorer than the poorest US state.
Hmm. But this collapse that you're talking about, the collapse of systems, it happens within next 5 years, or does it take like a decade or two?
I don't know what, look, when collapses happen, it's impossible to predict. Because the point of a collapse is panic. You can't predict panic reaction. You can predict rationality. I mean, you know, there's even there's a problem, right? I mean, the basis of all economic theory is Ceteris paribus, and man is rational. Ceteris paribus is all things being equal, which never is the case. Man is rational is what? How many rational people do you know?
I can.
Because one kind of rationality doesn't translate into all kinds of rationality, right? So you know, it's impossible to model. It's just too complex.
But answer this to me, because I was talking to Mr. A.S. Bhasan, and we had this conversation wherein he told me that every time we have seen a Pakistan aggression, we have retaliated and we have won. But we lost everything when the talks happened. We lost everything on the table. Where does this happen? Is it like diplomatically? How we are the kids of, let's say, Chanakya? How are we losing everything on?
Bhai, we are also the kids of the Mahabharata
True.
and the Bhagavad Gita. Do you see even 1% of the complexity in the modern Indian mind?
No.
No. Sometimes I read, when I'm reading the Mahabharata, I prefer the Mahabharata to the Ramayana because it's such a layered,
Hmm.
complex. The characters are so, complex. And it's such a big, thick, convoluted story. I'm looking at it or reading the Gita and going, really? This is the country that produced that?
Yeah.
Or when you go to Hampi, you're looking at the ruins and you're like, seriously, this is the country that produced
I know what you're
that?
talking about,
Like, I
Humpy.
look at the average building here in Bombay and I'm like, bhai, what?
Hmm.
Sometimes I genuinely think all these temples in India and the Arthashastra, Kalidasa, Gita, all of these were written by aliens. I don't think what passes off as an Indian today is capable of any of that.
Hmm.
Or as my friend Sushant Sareen says, you know, in 732 AD, we discovered the zero, and we were so taken in by our discovery, we collectively decided to reduce ourselves to zero.
Yeah. By the way, I love Sushant. Every time I've seen him, let's say on any podcast, especially on Smita Prakash, he's like the nicest, cuddly man. And then there's this clips comes out wherein he has lost all of his cool.
Yeah. You don't want to be on the wrong side of Sushant, bro. Trust me on this.
Okay. But last thing for this podcast, India, Pakistan, what is going to be the future? Where do you think all of this escalation is going towards? What is the end scenario?
Impossible to predict. You know why? Because the game so far has been, and even in our modeling, see, we never assumed a shift in modeling, is that the onus of off ramping has always been on India. Now, India has made it very clear that we're not accepting any onus of off ramping. पाकिस्तान को ही करना पाकिस्तान ने शुरू किया पाकिस्तान को ही खत्म करना पड़ेगा so I don't even know. I mean, there's no historical precedent. There's no modeling precedent. What do I go on?
But will Pakistan take it off ramp?
It depends. If you generate enough pressure on them to change their mindset, they might.
Is it military pressure or diplomatic pressure?
Military. Not diplomatic. Diplomatic, remember, is what we discussed in the Hindi podcast. They don't understand. They think politeness is a lack of seriousness.
Yeah. So that old saying in Hindi, "लातों के भूत बातों से नहीं
Ah,
मानते."
exactly.
Okay. So it has to be a military.
It has to.
Okay.
It has to. There is no other way.
Okay. Perfect. Abhijit, thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you. What a such a dripping with pessimism conversation. But well, whatever.
Yeah, the world needs that.
The word
The world needs two things. One is your pessimism. The second is your poetry.
I think Galidas, I think so. In Sanskrit, the fingers. This is called Kalidasa. This is called Anamika.
Okay.
You know why? Kalidasa was number 1, but there was no number 2. It was an insult to Kalidasa to put this as Anamika. So I am like in the world of Gali, I am Galidas, and then there is Anamika.
Beautiful. That is a perfect note to end this podcast on. Abhijit, thank you so much for both the
Thank you.
podcasts.
Thank you so much.